Nobody's seen or heard from her since last night. I'd say like what? Midnight, yeah.
This surveillance footage shows the last moments of Nicole Vanderheyden before she was found dead in a field with devastating injuries.
Naked, other than socks that were on her feet, and a pink wristband. Other than that, we had no form of. There's obvious injury, trauma on the side of her face.
Suspicion would immediately fall on the boyfriend, who claimed that they got separated after a night out with friends.
Right now, I'm going to be taking you in custody. I'm going to be handcuffing you. I'll explain all that to you in a bit. And transporting you down to the sheriff's department. Okay?
Okay.
Be cooperative with me.
All right.
And we'll roll it that way.
Wow, okay.
But did he really do it? Or did the police have the wrong guy? The truth will totally shock you.
Who's missing?
It's my girlfriend, and she does live with me, and she's never done this before.
What's her name?
Nicole Vanderheyden.
On the afternoon of May 21st, 2016, a 35-year-old man named Doug Daytree called 911 to report his girlfriend, 31-year-old Nicole Vanderheyden, missing. Nicole, or Nikki as her friends called her, was a teacher and a mom of 3, 2 of which she had from her previous marriage. She lived in the Green Bay area, Wisconsin, where she worked as a substitute teacher and a part-time waitress. She and Doug met in 2015, and after just a few months of dating, she found out she was pregnant, and the two decided to move in together. By all accounts, Nikki was a wonderful mother and always put her children first. At the time of this incident, Nikki's youngest son, Dylan, was 6 months old, and being a nursing mom, she had been cooped up in the house for a while. So when a friend suggested they go out on the night of May 20th, 2016, Nikki and Doug thought it was a good idea. Nikki's 2 older children were staying over at their dad's, so they only had to find a babysitter for Dylan. They managed to get her mom to look after the baby for a few hours until another friend named Dallas Kennedy could finish her shift at work and take over. At around 8 p.m., Nikki, Doug, and a few friends arrived at a bar called the Watering Hole in Green Bay, where the metal band Steel Panther was performing. They all seemed to have a great time, Nikki and Doug even taking this selfie together. However, Doug would later say that Nikki was really drinking a lot. He said, "She had 2 down and I was still on my first one. She was chugging them down." The concert ended at around 11 p.m., and that's when things started going downhill. The group had agreed to go to another bar called Sardine Can, but somehow Doug and his friend Greg were left behind. Greg would later tell police that the 2 of them had bumped into some old friends from high school at the Watering Hole and decided to hang out for a little bit before joining the larger group.
I don't know why Nikki ended up leaving with our group of friends and not leaving with Doug and I. I don't know if she was just like swept up by the group and jumped in the car with them. They were going to go to the Sardine Can. So
Who all rode together to the Sardine Can?
All of those people on that list besides myself and Doug. I mean, I think all the rest of them. Jesse Cutler had showed up. That was a girl that might have also got it. I mean, he's got a big SUV, but I'm assuming that nobody else there had a vehicle unless Jesse had a vehicle.
So who drove?
That Mike Gillespie drove all those people to the concert from our original spot that we were at.
Okay. And he drove everybody down to?
I assuming that he did, yes. So when Doug and I were about to walk out, we saw an old friend from high school, and we started to talk to her and her husband for a little while.
When Nikki realized that Doug had stayed at the Watering Hole and was not in a hurry to join them, she started sending him some angry texts. At around 11:12 p.m., she wrote, "So what you with? Then you abusive asshole." It's clear that Nikki was getting angrier by the minute, but Doug didn't understand where all this was coming from and basically answered the texts with, "LOL, stop, and be good, I'll see you at the Sardine Can." But Doug would not immediately head over to the Sardine Can. He and his friends started getting high, and he said that he lost track of time. Nikki, on the other hand, tried to enjoy her night, but getting more and more pissed off as time went on and Doug had not shown up. She called him multiple times, but Doug was not picking up her calls. Then, one of the girls in her group called him, and he picked up. And that's when things just blew up, and Nikki stormed out of the place, never to be seen alive again. Now, you might be wondering why Nikki reacted the way she did when it was obvious that Doug was simply hanging out with some old friends. And here's the thing, Nikki and Doug's relationship was not that great. Remember, they had only been dating for a few months before Nikki got pregnant and they decided to shack up. According to their friends, Doug was having a difficult time adjusting to his new life with 2 children and a new baby. Nikki also suspected Doug wanted to be with other women, and Doug's behavior wasn't really reassuring her, as he would often go off with friends, leaving Nikki to feel even more neglected. So this kind of blew up that night after Doug ditched her to be with his friends and then refused to pick up her calls, but picked up another girl's call. You can imagine how furious she was as she sprinted out of the bar. One of Doug's friends, Aaron Kulinski, who had been driving the group around, ran after Nikki and tried to convince her to get back into the bar. He would later say that he found her crying in the street and tried to comfort her, even offering to take her home to her child. But Nikki was drunk, hysterical, and she refused to be comforted. As she pushed him away, she ended up falling on the ground, kicking and screaming at the top of her lungs. People across the street were beginning to stare at them, so Aaron had to head back out. But he still managed to get her back on her feet, and Nikki just walked away. Aaron shouted for her to come back, telling her, "You're a babe in the woods," but Nikki would not listen or turn around.
And at that point, I think she they were on that outdoor patio at the sardine camp, so it's kind of just like an open door to go out. And from what I heard was, that she's like, "I'm leaving," and she started walking. And our friend Aaron,
where were you guys at this time?
We were in the watering hole parking lot at that point when this happened. So
What time was this about?
I think probably like 12:15, maybe a little earlier, 12:10, that we were walking out to go to the sardine camp. So our friend Aaron tried to stop her. He's like, "What are you doing? You can't just run off. Just wait. They're on their way here." So then Doug's calling her and talking to her, and she's, yelling at him, and, "Why aren't you here? Are you with some girl or something?" She's getting a little crazy. And, Aaron had texted either Doug or I saying, she took off. I tried to stop her.
Doug and Greg were still at the watering hole when they received a text from Aaron telling them that Nikki had run off. Doug then called Nikki, and he would later say that she was slurring her words and not making any sense at all. He told her to go back to the sardine can and they would be there in 5 minutes. But Nikki was really mad and didn't want to listen. Then her phone died, and they couldn't get in touch with her. Greg said that they drove around the bar for a while to see if they could spot her. Then, at around 1 a.m., they entered the sardine can and started asking around to see if anyone had seen Vicky.
This must have been at about 1:15 that I started to ask people. And I asked this one guy, I'm like, "Did you see a blonde girl, out here?" And he's like, "Nikki?" And I'm like, "Yeah," But, so he's like, "Yeah, she left a while ago." And then I asked another guy, and this other guy knew, said her name too.
Greg described Nikki as a super friendly and outgoing person who would talk to basically anyone.
So, I know that could, that she could be very friendly in talking to people, in almost a naive way.
Doug and Greg stayed at the bar until 2:40 a.m. and then headed home. They assumed that Nikki had probably decided to go to a friend's house to get sober and would come home later. But when Doug woke up later that morning, Nikki was still not home.
So she was on foot?
Yes.
No idea where she might go?
No idea. I called some friends.
Did she have a cell phone with her or anything?
Yeah, and it's been off since last night.
2 officers arrived at the home to talk to Doug and find out everything that had happened leading up to Nikki's disappearance. They found Doug waiting for them along with his parents, who had come over to offer moral support. Trey Holschbach, who was the sergeant assigned to the case, described Doug as pale and hungover. She did not notice any scratches or marks on his arms and his hands, but he was wearing a Fitbit on his wrist. Doug was very cooperative and told the officers everything that happened that night, including the text messages.
I just try to pinpoint the actual time that she was last seen or heard from. And that would have probably been the 12:36 a.m. phone call that you had with her, Greg.
Every time that we talked, every time we tried to call after that, the phone was just dead. So I don't know if her phone died in her phone, but you know, she never answered again after that call.
She's not here. She said, so what you with?
Well, I'm sorry.
Did she hang up on you? Was it pretty clear that she was upset?
And
Where am I looking?
Right here. This is all her text. Oh, this is like, that was during the show. I asked her where she was in the concert, and she said that.
But yeah, I mean, at a certain
At
point,
11:12 p.m. she said that?
Yeah, so, after 11
What did it
there.
say? So what?
she was kind of hard.
So what you with?
Okay.
The officers wanted to know more about the text where Nikki had referred to Doug as an abusive asshole.
Why is she calling you abusive?
I don't know.
What does yours say? Okay.
I don't know where she gets this stuff sometimes.
Is that common for her to talk that way to you when she's been drinking?
Sometimes, yeah, I mean,
Or when she's sober?
she doesn't drink that often, but
Okay.
What Doug didn't know at the time was that the police had already received a report about a body, which was found on a farm field off Hoffman Road, not far from the home. The body was found by 2 teen boys at 1:45 p.m. They initially thought that it was a deer, but when they got closer, they were horrified to discover that it was a naked female body.
It's naked, other than socks that were on her feet and a pink wristband. Other than that, we had no form of. There's obvious injury, trauma on the side of her face.
After getting all the information they needed, the officers left without mentioning anything about the body to Doug. However, at around midnight, he was asked to go to the sheriff's office for some follow-up questions. He repeated everything he had told the officers earlier and denied that he had any involvement in Nikki's disappearance. He also mentioned that Nikki would sometimes walk off like that whenever they had an argument.
What exactly happened that night? I don't know if I had been out or...
Similar to this though, or she just kind of walked off on her own?
No, she didn't. There was another time she did just walk off on her own. That was it was like January, it was the night after, it was the night of the Arizona playoff game. Okay. And we were at the ravine watching it there. We had gone to the bar east, meet up with a bunch of friends there, and she had started freaking out on me at the bar, and she actually hit me at the bar there, and like ran out. And it was like 0, you know, and I ran out after, I was closing my tab up, and so I closed that up and I ran out after her, and she was running up Line Kill there, not to the corner, is that little auto place in the corner, and then a squad had pulled in and stopped her, and I ran up and talked to her, and she was just like belligerent with the officers there, and I ended up putting her in the back of the squad car, and I walked back to the bar. We had a cab waiting for us, and well, it was on its way, and so they stayed there and made sure that she got in the cab and we went home.
The officers then asked him if there was anything else that happened that night that they should know.
Is there anything else that you can think of that would be helpful to us in this?
I don't know, she just bubbled and she goes out and just said something to whoever she came across. I don't know. I'm going to talk to everybody on that freaking street in that neighborhood. I need to do it.
Well, that's part of what we're going to do too.
Towards the end of the interview, officers told him that the body they found wore a pink wristband like the one that was being given at the watering hole. And that's when Doug just lost it and started crying and hyperventilating.
Was there any other details you guys know?
No.
How would it happen, possibly happen?
No. Like I said, I don't even know 100%. You know, that it's her.
Just the way they said it on the news, the gruesome discovery
Well, that's the newest trigger for looking for viewers.
At that moment, he realized that the officers suspected him of being Nikki's killer, and he was right.
Right now, I'm going to be taking you into custody. I'll be handcuffing you. I'll explain all that to you in a bit. And transporting you down to the sheriff's department. Okay? Okay. Be cooperative with me. All right. And we'll roll it that way.
Wow, okay.
Doug was arrested on suspicion of first-degree homicide. He was held in Brown County Jail as the investigation continued. Everything seemed to be pointing towards Doug as the killer. Investigators knew that he and Nikki were having problems in their relationship and that he had even told his mother he was thinking of kicking Nikki and her children out of his home. Nikki's friends and family also didn't like Doug very much because he was lazy and seemed to prefer sleeping around instead of going to work. Some text messages found in Doug's phone showed how Nikki would often complain about how Doug treated her and her children. In one text dated May 8th, she wrote, "Anything I even say, you just snap at me, so I don't say much. Thank you for making me feel like a piece of shit every day." Then, in another text from May 16th, she wrote, "Yelling at Dylan this morning and talking about moving out. He is just a baby, and feeling your hatred, it makes me want to cry all day." Doug responded to this by saying, "I'm sorry, Nikki and Dylan." Although there were no reports of violence, Nikki's sister told the police that the relationship between Doug and Nikki had gotten super rocky because of Doug's use of illegal substances.
She's been very depressed lately. Why has she been depressed? Because of Doug. Can you tell me more about that? I guess in the beginning of their relationship, she just kind of knew they were both. She had a hard time since divorce, and then she had a rough couple of years. And then she met Doug, and she's like, "Oh, we're going kind of crazy. We will get together and go work and stuff." And then a couple months later, she found out she was pregnant. She came with me, and she wanted to get an abortion, but I told her to keep it because I had gone through the same thing, and I did it. And it's the biggest mistake I've ever made. So I told her to keep it. The other friends, she did, and they stayed together, and I know it's been really, really rocky during her entire pregnancy in their relationship. An example would be like they went to a wedding together, and while she was pregnant, and she saw him doing coke with his friends, and she got really upset and left. And this was like 45 minutes away from home, and she was like 8 months pregnant. And he got mad at her and said, "You need to come back now," so she did.
Nikki's sister Heather also described Doug as being controlling and often threatening to break up with Nikki.
Crazy relationship. He's always been very controlling and very, like, she didn't answer her phone, he'd freak out and like break up with her.
Is this something that you witnessed, or is it something that Nikki told you?
The one wedding was, obviously she told me, but I mean, I went there one morning. She showed me all the text messages from him.
Okay.
You remember Nikki's friend, Dallas Kennedy, who was babysitting Dylan the night of her disappearance? Well, she also didn't like Doug that much and had a lot to say about that night when Doug showed up with his friend instead of Nikki.
Were you in the living room, a bedroom?
I was sleeping on the long couch.
Okay.
In the living room.
I take it Dylan was asleep also?
Dylan was asleep in his bassinet upstairs. I put him upstairs at this point.
Okay. What room was he in?
I believe his room. There was a bassinet and a bed in there, so I believe it was their room, also his room. They shared.
So did Doug arrive by himself at this time?
He was with a friend.
Okay. Did you catch that person's name?
Greg.
Had you ever met Greg before?
No.
Now, you had seen a few times Doug Dietrich before this? At least?
I'd say about 3 to 4 times with them going out to dinner or just in passing, and he came to pick up Dylan once from my house, so just very brief.
Dallas talked about how Doug had shown her the text messages when she asked about Nikki's whereabouts. At one point, she even asked if she was in the trunk of the car.
Yeah, so just bantering back and forth. I had thrown out a few, like, is she with her sister? Is she with, a few friends? Did she go to the next bar? Like, shouting out anything. Where could she be? I don't know. Did she walk home? Did she walk over the bridge? Did you drive that way home? I pretty much spouted everything off in my head to him. And everything kept coming back, no, 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 no. So I finally had said, is she in the trunk of your car? And he looked at me and he goes, no.
Was that a weird response?
Sustained relevance, what she thinks. Go ahead.
Dallas also talked about being scared and wanting to leave right away after Doug asked her for pot.
I need to relax. Do you have any marijuana on you? And I was like, actually I do.
And then what did he do?
He proceeded to smoke while sitting in the love seat, and he offered me, and I declined.
And what happened after that?
Just me trying to just be done with the night and kind of go, just like, okay, here, you do this, and I have to go. I really have to go. And I proceeded to walk to the front door. I put my hand on the door handle, and he called my name out to the point of startling. I'm right when I was about to leave, and he had asked, he goes, Dallas. And I said, yes, Doug. And he goes, can you come back here? Can I hit that one more time? And I go, next time. And he's like, you're right, okay. And I opened the door, and I ran for my car.
And how did you feel at that point?
Just out of place. And I don't know, just an urge to get out of the house.
It's good to note that Dallas already didn't like Doug, so her opinion of him could be a bit biased. Also, she didn't know Doug that well, and he had just showed up in the middle of the night without her friend, whom he was having problems with, and was now mysteriously missing. So obviously she would be skeptical of his story and wondering if he did something to her. She did mention that Doug appeared concerned and kept asking her several times to try and contact Nikki. Up till this point, everything seemed to be pointing to Doug as the bad guy, but investigators would receive new information that would throw the case in a completely different direction. An autopsy on Nikki's body revealed her cause of death to be strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. The medical examiner could not determine which injuries came first. Her body was covered with marks and bruises, and she had over 240 injuries all over her body, including her intimate areas, suggesting that someone had forced themselves on her. The injury on her head was so bad that there was a pool of red around the wounds, which meant that she was alive for some of the time during the ordeal. DNA swabs were taken from Nikki's body and sent to crime labs for analysis. Meanwhile, one of Doug and Nikki's neighbors called the police about some red spots in the street and a wire he had found while mowing his lawn. The police came and retrieved the wire and took samples of the blood. It turned out to be Nikki's, and the wire contained her DNA, as well as that of an unknown man. This meant that the murder had taken place near her home, and her body was transported to the field afterwards, which threw even more suspicion on Doug. While searching the area where her body was found, investigators came across her clothes, purse, and other items by the guardrail of Highway 172. The next step was to search Doug's house, his car, and Nikki's car. They also took DNA swabs from him and all the male friends who were with her that night. The DNA sample collected from Nikki's body did not match any of them, but it did match someone in the system named George Birch. George was not someone new to the police, as he had a long criminal record that involved violence and narcotics. Police learned that around the time Nikki went missing, George was drinking at a nearby bar called Richard Cranium's. His phone records showed that he was outside Nikki and Doug's home at 3:01 a.m. and stayed until 3:53 a.m. He then went to the Bellevue field where Nikki's body was found at 3:58 a.m. until 4:02 a.m. He returned to his home at 4:22 a.m. When he was brought in for questioning, George refused to cooperate and asked for a lawyer.
The reason you're here is in reference to a homicide investigation into Nicole Vanderheyden. Okay? So, is this something that you want to talk to me about? Sir? What's that? You don't want to talk to me about that? So, if I read your Miranda rights, you don't want to talk to me, so I would prefer a lawyer.
During his trial, which began in February 2018, George admitted to meeting Nikki that night at a bar. He claimed that the two hit it off and he drove her home thinking that they would get intimate.
You drove Nicole out in front of her house, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's the truth. You parked there out in front of Berkeley Road, correct?
Sir.
You had every intention of having Nicole that night, correct?
I was hoping that was the way it was going. That's the way it seemed like it was leading. Yes, sir.
Did Nicole tell you that she had a young baby at home, that she was a nursing mother?
I believe she had said something about it. The nursing part, I'm not sure. I do believe she said she had a child because she had mentioned to me that she had a babysitter.
I thought she told you that the kids were out of town with their dad.
I said those two, but I also said when we got there, the light was on. She said the babysitter was up.
Why would that be a problem? Why wouldn't you just ask the babysitter to go home and go inside?
Sir, I don't know. I've never been in her house. I don't know her babysitter.
He denied hurting Nikki, saying that she had consented to being intimate with him. But the injuries on Nikki's body showed otherwise.
You heard the doctor explain those injuries and explain that they would be painful injuries, even if they were consensual. You heard that, right?
I believe that's what she said, but I'm not sure.
Caused by penetration.
Correct.
And that was part of your not gentle activity that you had with her, right?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
That was all a result of your not gentle activity that you had with her?
If that's the way you put it, yes, sir.
I think that's the way you put it.
It wasn't gentle, no.
It was painful.
That I don't know.
He tried to throw Doug under the bus, claiming that he had found them fooling around in the car and attacked them. But instead of killing them both, he chose to kill Nikki.
She had a fractured jaw, correct?
I don't know, sir. That's what the medical examiner said. But I can't speak for sir. I'm not a doctor.
You heard all of that, right?
Yes, sir.
You saw her injuries. You sat through court to see the defensive injuries to her hands, to her feet, to her palms, to her fingernails, that she fought for her life, right?
According to what the doctor said, yes.
And you were just out cold during all of this?
Yes, sir.
And you say that Doug Dietrich did this, but of course, you didn't see that happen either, did you?
I cannot say for certain, no.
And you'll have the jury believe that Doug Dietrich sat there and did all of these things to his girlfriend while you were just out cold on the lawn hanging out.
I wasn't hanging out. I'd been knocked out from behind, sir. And I didn't know anyone was behind me.
Actually, you didn't say you were knocked out from behind. You didn't remember what happened. You were having sex, and the next thing you knew, you woke up on the ground, right?
It made me lead me to believe that I had been knocked out because I didn't pass out from standing there.
And this is where things get interesting. According to George, Doug made him dispose of Nikki's body.
So rather than just you or killing you in the middle of the street, he decided to enlist you, a total stranger, to help him dispose of the body of his girlfriend.
I don't know what his plans were.
He had you drive them to a remote location, correct?
Yes, sir.
He thought it would be a good idea to have a complete stranger know where he's dumping a body?
I don't know what he thought. You'd have to ask Mr. Dietrich about that.
And you described taking Nicole's body. You're the one who carried her body to her final resting place, did you not?
If that was her final resting place, yes, sir.
You dragged her into that field. You dumped her on the ground, right?
I didn't drag her anywhere.
You said your fireman's carried?
I said I picked her up and carried her over there, and at the end, I dropped her feet. I didn't say anything about dragging her.
You didn't say anything about dropping her feet. You said you had her by the arms. Which is it?
My exact story, if you go back and look, was that I picked her up, carried her out of the car over to the position of roughly where it was, and let her go and had my arms under her towards the end.
Of course, no one believed his story because it didn't make any sense. Also, it was brought up at the trial that Doug was wearing a Fitbit that recorded no activity at the time of the murder. Also, his cell phone record placed him at his house during all this time.
What really happened was you drove Nicole home 20 miles away from where you lived, fully expecting you were going to have sex, right? That was your expectation. You were going to have sex. That's why you're driving her home, right?
I was hoping that we would. It was leading from what had happened before and the way we had spoken. It seemed like that's what was going to happen.
When you get there, and it becomes clear that Nikki isn't going to have sex with you, when she attempts to go into her house and leave your vehicle, that's when your mood changes, right?
No, sir.
That's when things get aggressive, don't they?
Not at all.
That's when you grab that cord and strike her, don't you?
No, sir, not at all.
That's when Nikki gets slammed on the ground repeatedly when she's trying to run toward her house, when those things leading the direction back to her home.
None of that is true.
On March 1st, 2018, a jury found George guilty of Nikki's death, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You could see the relief on Doug and Nikki's family members' faces when the judgment was read. While he was not a killer, Doug was no saint. In February 2017, he was charged with domestic violence against Nikki's sister, Heather, who had been staying with him to help take care of her nephew. According to the criminal complaint, Heather and Doug were driving home together from a birthday party when he allegedly touched her inappropriately. When Heather told him to stop, he got angry and began driving at high speed, refusing to let her out. At one point, he even ran a stoplight and only stopped when she started kicking his windshield. He pleaded no contest to the charges, and the judge decided to withhold judgment on the felonies on the condition that he would stay out of bars and out of trouble. What do you think about this case? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button.